seen my business cards? I want to pack them for CiderCon. We're leaving in just a few days.
They're already in the luggage, Barry. You packed them a week ago.
Right. Of course I did. Well, perhaps you could help me with my selection of suits that I'll be wearing.
You've been trying on your suits every single day for a week now. I think we're all packed and ready to go.
Right. Well, then should we go over the list then of all the recording equipment that we're bringing? I know that Rhea is going to be setting up with Krista Scruggs during the Palm Boots session, and then she'll be moderating the beginning cider maker panel. That's on Thursday. Should be quite interesting. I think she's also going to be recording Perceptions of Dryness. That's with the New York Cider Association. Also, Ryan Monkman of Fieldbird Cider and the Oak. And I think a couple other things too. I think we should go over the recording equipment again, don't you?
It's all set, Barry. We're ready to go.
Perry, how about bringing us into this here episode?
Who better to introduce a cider chat than a Perry Pair?
Perry?
Just saying. Hello, my name is Perry Pair, and myself and my good friends here are all going to CiderCon in Chicago, where I do not see anything about Perrys or Perry Pairs. I could be a very good speaker on the topic, and I'd like to see a little bit more of that at CiderCon, but perhaps I need to have a PerryCon.
Perry?
Tell everybody what they're listening to.
And you are listening to Cider Chat.
Episode 165. Hello and welcome to Cider Chat. My name is Rhea Windcaller, and I am the producer and cider MC of this weekly podcast, where we speak with makers, cider enthusiasts, and folks within the cider trade from around the world. This week, we're going to be talking about the Monterey Bay Cider Tour taking place in April of 2019, coming right up. But first, a bit of news out and about in Ciderville. To all you new listeners out there in Ciderville checking out this here podcast for the first time, welcome. Just to give you an idea, we're going to be talking a little bit of news out and about in Ciderville, as you heard, and then we're going to go right into the main conversation talking about the Monterey Bay Cider Tour. And of course, if you are a regular listener, you know who the Talking Palms are, but if you don't, well, we had Perry Pair bringing us into this week's episode 165. Mr. Quince, who is always behind the scenes, helping me in so many ways, keeping us all on task, and the Medlars, who are always full of good cheer.
Thank you, Rhea.
You are so welcome. And while I was getting set up on this podcast and editing, all these emails were flying in, and one came in from Anne Marie Thornton of James Creek Cider House. That's based in North Carolina. And I am stoked because both Anne Marie and David are going to CiderCon, and we're going to be meeting, and we're getting takeout to bring to the hotel. I know, we should be going out into Chicago, but when you're recording, sometimes it's a little difficult. It could be a little noisy in the restaurants, and there's nothing better than having cider in front of you and you're able to gab and eat food. And of course, they are looking at pairing with some Southern food. So we're going to be doing a recording, having some food, a cider dinner. I am stoked. I've met these folks a couple of times, actually the first time in Chicago during the Cider Share on Wednesday, and I immediately fell in love with them and their cider. So it's going to be a pleasure for me to be doing that, and I'll be keeping you updated as we go along. There are 2 episodes out just about CiderCon. You want to go to episode 158, and that was with Michelle McGrath, the executive director of the United States Association of Cider Makers, which puts on CiderCon each year. And then 2 weeks ago was Pro Tips for Navigating CiderCon, and that was about the Chicago Cider Week that is taking place at the same time. It actually kicks off on Friday, February 1st, and CiderCon kicks off on February 4th with all these cider tours going out and doing cider food and pairing all around Chicago. So if you want to get a little bit more info and details, if you're on your way to CiderCon right now, go to your podcast app, whatever it might be. This is available on all the directories for podcasts, even if you have an Android phone. So let your friends know that it's available everywhere. And you want to download episode number 158 with Michelle, CiderCon 2019, and then 163 Pro Tips, and that was with Ambrosia Borowski, who is the general manager of the Northman Cider Bar. And Ambrosia puts together Chicago Cider Week. At the tail end of all this, on February 9th, is the Chicago Cider Summit put on by Alan Shapiro, and that's going to be taking place just a stone's throw from the location of the main conference. I think it's called the Navy Pier, and I'm going to be there. I'm going to have a table up on the second floor over by the Northman Bar area, which will be quite the perfect position, really. I'll be sitting at that table there with some friends. You want to come by and chit-chat with us? I'm going to be doing recording specifically at the Cider Summit with folks who are attending. So if you're a cider drinker, a cider fan, and you are at Chicago Cider Summit, do come by and raise a glass and do a little bit of chit-chatting. You'll also probably see me maneuvering about with my recorder too. So that should be very interesting. I'm always thrilled when I get an opportunity to speak to cider enthusiasts just like myself. Typically, I have a little script for people to answer, but you never know where the conversation can go, because when you're drinking cider, I mean, the sky is the limit. I'm just so excited. All right, I'm going to try to kind of rein it in here. When we come back, I'm going to be bringing you a little bit of a reminder about a cider competition coming right up on February 10th. There is still time to send your ciders into the New York International Cider Competition. It's taking place in New York City, and it's on February 10th. If you don't make it into that competition, there's also the Berlin, Germany competition too. And the judges are trade buyers, the folks who put it on the shelf and are judging by category and price point. So it's pretty darn informative that way. Just go to the links in the show notes to find how you could do that, or Google New York International Cider Competition. And I want to thank them for being sponsors of this here podcast over the past couple weeks, because it's always nice to have a sponsor with something valuable that I think is supporting Ciderville, not just in one sector of Ciderville, but so universal. So thanks to Adam Levy and the New York International Cider Competition. Best of luck if you're putting in your entry in. It's never wasted time to find out what others think about your cider. This week, I want to share with you the Monterey Bay Cider Tour, hopefully enticing you to sign up for this amazing trip out to the makers of this really historical region for U.S. cider. Monterey Bay is south of San Francisco, about 70 miles south. So if you're visiting this region, most likely I'd kind of recommend flying into the San Jose airport, where then you could stop at Cider Junction, which is a cider bar en route to Santa Cruz County, where this cider tour is going to be kicking off. In fact, there is an episode with Cider Junction. I will put the links in the show notes, where I was able to visit last year. That is a cider bar. It's happening. It's probably only about 15 minutes from the airport, because it's right in town. It might even be closer. It's a wonderful, wonderful spot, and fantastic owners there doing what they do best, which is pouring you a glass of cider. So check out Cider Junction in San Jose. From there, you head over towards the Pacific Ocean, because that's where we're going to be. We're going to be right on the Pacific Ocean. I'm probably doing a little bit of a sunset cider club, raising the glass to the sunset, indeed. And big part of this tour is to be looking at this region and the historical picture of apples in the USA over the past 150 years. And when I say that, and if you've been listening to Cider Chat, you know when I say past 150 years, well, we're talking about Martinelli's. So we're going to be kicking off our tour on Friday, April 12th, going to S. Martinelli's and Company and getting a tour with John Martinelli. Now, John Martinelli was on this podcast just recently on episode 162, and he is the great grandson of the founder of Martinelli's. Martinelli's might be a familiar name. Like me, you might have thought, wow, that's just going to be like apple juice. No. They are originally a hard cider, a fermenting company way back in 1868, and now they have a cider coming out. We're going to be drinking that cider, the 1868, meeting John Martinelli, and he's going to take us on a walk at their plant in Watsonville, California. That whole region of California was a major producer of apples. Over the years, they've kind of been reaching out further. And then there was kind of an encroachment of berries, berry growings, believe it or not, that made a lot of folks kind of taking down their apple trees. Not for Martinelli's, and you've heard it probably many times on this podcast with the makers who have been on past episodes saying, if not for them, we wouldn't have had these orchards here, because they kept the local farming, orcharding communities going, buying their apples for so many years. So we're going to kick off Friday by going to Martinelli's, their plant right in Watsonville, and this is a huge juice plant. I'm sure we're going to all have stainless steel and be walking around there. And meeting John. John is a unique guy because he has such a passion. He's been working at the company since he was a kid. His job at one point when he was a teenager was cleaning out the cider tanks. And he has a passion for apples. That I think that's really the most coolest thing that, we have like the oldest cider making family in the U.S. is an apple-based company. That's crazy good in my mind. That's really getting to the roots of it. We're going to be meeting in Capitola, California, which is not too far from Martinelli's, actually. It's all in that area, Santa Cruz County, all part of the inland part of Monterey Bay. We meet at 1 p.m. on Friday the 12th. So if you are someone in the area and want to come to this tour, let's say you are a Californian or you live on the West Coast, you could actually fly in on the morning of the 12th and still meet us for this tour. So hopefully that'll make it easy for folks kind of trying to figure out work and taking that day off. Because after that, the whole afternoon is just going to be action-packed. We meet with John, and then we go to Apt House to go and hang out with Santa Cruz Cider Company and Tanuki Cider. Now, if you've been listening to this podcast, you know Santa Cruz Cider Company. You know Nicole and Natalie and Felix. In fact, if you go to episode 159, just a couple episodes ago, it was Ciderville Tales, and that was really a walkabout on the property that we're going to be going to, seeing that 1880s apple barn made out of redwood. And outside of that apple barn is a sequoia. And Nicole told me that it's about 80 years old. And when I was there in December doing the recon for this tour, I had this kind of in the back of my mind, I want to bring a sequoia home. And wouldn't you know, did I find out a lot about sequoias? There's redwoods and there's sequoias. Redwoods kind of grow straight up like a needle, essentially. And around that area are the coastal redwoods, and they're super tall. Sequoias, there's a Sequoia sylvester. I don't know the Latin terminology, but it's sylvestris or sylvester, probably sylvestris, and that one is more coastal. But the Sequoia giganteum are the ones that live up in the Sierras. Now, in my spot of Ciderville in New England, we get snow. In fact, we're going to be getting a little snowstorm tonight. There's snow outside. There's ice. The trees have a lot of weight. And you're thinking, okay, well, could you grow a sequoia there? Well, guess what? We're going to find out, because I, after quite a bit of hunting, was able to find a Sequoia gigantum. And what it took was going to a number of nurseries. I'd call folks up and then, do you have a Sequoia gigantum? And they had every other sequoia except that. Then I thought, well, why don't I just go walking out in the woods and, find one, bring one home, kind of dig up a sugar maple and bring it home, or an apple tree. The interesting thing about these trees is that the only way that you could get a baby sequoia is by germinating the cone. Otherwise, if you go up to the sequoia and you see like a little baby sequoia and you try pulling it, its roots are embedded. They're like sprouts off of the root system. And the actual forest where sequoias are, or redwoods, all those roots are super duper interlocked, which is kind of cool. It's kind of like that movie Avatar. You kind of get this crazy forest scene, which I dig. And if you're listening to this podcast, you probably have a super duper affection for trees too, as I do. So that was not going to work. I finally had to go to a nursery outside of the area. We went for a drive, and I was able to find some Sequoia gigantums. Now, these Sequoia gigantums are the largest trees in the world. They're the ones that reckless people back in the day would carve the innards out of so folks could drive their car through it. Ha ha ha, right? I mean, I guess that's cool, but I don't think the tree felt so good about it. They could grow up to 320 feet, and they live for 3,000 years. Kind of interesting thing is I'd go around to the different folks and say, do you have a sequoia? Yeah. And I said, well, I want to bring you back to New England. And they would kind of pause and didn't, it's like, well, can you? And then they thought about it and they said, I think you can. In fact, my sister-in-law, who lives in Santa Cruz with my brother, she told me that a friend of hers moved to the UK and bought a house in the UK primarily because there was a sequoia there. So I thought, geez, there are actually sequoias growing all around the world. The only grove of sequoia is in the Sierra Mountains in California. And so I ended up getting two sequoias. I call one Santa and the other Cruz. And now the next job was, well, how do you bring a tree home? I had two pieces of luggage. And what I did was, I would say Santa, I'm looking at Santa right now, because Santa and Cruz are both indoors until the spring thaw and we could get them in the ground. Santa is probably about, I'm going to say 18 inches tall. And what I did with them is I took their branches and moved them straight up in alignment, as you would do with any tree. Just kind of fold them straight up. And I did twine around to protect them. I had chopsticks in the soil to kind of protect them. And when I put them in my suitcase, I turned them sideways. And I had all these persimmons that I was bringing back from Soquel Cider, one of the stops on this tour, and actually the location for the cider dinner. At Persimmons, I had a bunch of cider from the makers of this area that I kind of packed around too. The goal is to pack, whether it's a hat or in this case a Sequoia gigantum, in a manner that it doesn't bend. So you use the persimmons, you use the bottles as I did, clothing, so that the tree in this case stays in total alignment. It doesn't bend. So you're building up around the tree as you put it in the suitcase. It's kind of cool. And I'll post a photo of the sequoias and the way that I wrapped them. When I said the chopsticks, I was putting them in vertical up along the trunk of the tree, just to give them added protection in case there was movement, that their trunk, not their trunk, but their tree body wouldn't bend at all. That was really the goal, to keep them in total alignment, as comfortable as possible. I figured, you know what? These trees, I talked to them because they have the power of a sequoia. I said, all I need to do is just get you home. So you're going to be in kind of darkness in my suitcase for less than 24 hours. What do you think? Can we do this? And maybe I'm a tree whisperer. I don't know. I think I heard them say, yes, let's do it. If you had seen them, you would have heard them say, yes, get me out of here too, because they had been planted in 1-gallon containers. And at this point, they were pretty root bound. We know their birth date, which is June 8th, 2016, because they were germinated. So that's kind of cool. You actually know the birth date of the sequoia. And when I chose Santa, who is just so happy right now, Santa looked really scraggly, like a Charlie Brown Christmas tree, and now is so happy to have all the spaciousness to just kick out. So I brought him home, and as soon as I got home, I took them out, took off the twine, let their limbs come down, and then the next day I went out and I got some cactus soil. Because, what do you plant sequoias in? And I put them in larger tubs because they really were pretty root bound, and filled it up with cactus soil so that they're pretty well drained. The task in the spring is going to be where to plant them, because 1,000 years from now, I don't want them blocking the sun from the house. They have to have room to grow, or else, you kind of endanger them. So it's not something that everybody can do. You certainly have to have the land. But what a fun adventure. And for me, being bicoastal, having family on the West Coast and on the East Coast, it was a way to bring a big part of a territory in the world that I feel so much of my heart is in. And I just want to say, these sequoias, they are spirit trees for sure. They are powerful, powerful trees. And there was, or is, this 80-year-old sequoia tree. They grow 4 feet a year next to the apple barn, where we're going to be meeting Santa Cruz Cider Company and Tanuki Cider Company, and taking a walk in the orchard right there. And then if you go back a couple episodes with that one, the Cider Tales episode 159, you'll hear Nicole and Natalie talking about the redwood trees, and that's where they put their apples for storage underneath the redwood trees, because it is a whole different, the temperature drops down there. So it's a nice, cool storage place. And those redwood trees are really close by too. Perhaps you're from California, you're used to these beings, these mighty, mighty trees. Even when I lived in California, and every time I go back, I am always in awe of them. And that they're living harmoniously with the apple trees next door. It just blows my mind. So that's our next stop after John Martinelli. We're going to go from like the big stainless steel juice plant, hanging out with John, who's really a down-home kind of guy, and then go up to Eptau's, hang at the apple barn, take that walk in the orchard, look at these sequoia trees, these redwoods. Maybe, who knows, maybe you will be inspired to bring home a sequoia tree. It's doable. And probably if you're traveling international, I don't think so. But in the U.S., it's actually doable. And tasting cider and having a cheese tasting too. So that's going to be crazy, rock solid good. When I come back, let me talk a little bit more about Santa Cruz Cider Company and Tanuki. Scrumping, gluten intolerance, and ingenuity of two sisters helped launch Santa Cruz Cider Company in 2010. When Nicole Todd and her sister Natalie Hens found a forgotten orchard loaded with apples, they decided to go scrumping. That orchard is now owned by a friend, and since then they have been offered to use an even larger family orchard dating back to 1880. The apple trees from both orchards are at least 100 years old, and you can definitely taste the terroir. Most recently, in fact, just in January 2019, They have just secured a location in Watsonville, California, down the road from Martinelli's, where they're going to be having a tasting room. Up to this point, they've been based in Santa Cruz, and they're definitely outgrowing that location. The artwork is all done by Felix Todd, which is Nicole's husband, and he is a tattoo artist by trade, and to see his labels, it's just crazy good. I have a bottle here of the Gravenstein. It's 6% alcohol by volume in a 22-ounce bottle, and it's of this apple. It's kind of this crazy, oh man, it's like street art. Graffiti on the side of the building, artwork. That alone is enticing. It has a dark label with white lettering. And it says, handcrafted, made with local Gravenstein apples, family owned and operated, unfiltered, unpasteurized, alive inside. And this is like a really alive operation. These folks have incredibly supportive of the community around them and really passionate about saving the apple orchards. I am so pleased to be able to offer this tour to meet these women, meet these sisters, and find out what they're doing there. It is a family operation, no doubt, and I'm really happy to know that they're expanding. In fact, their Champagne Method cider is going to be the kickoff cider at the cider dinner on Saturday night that will be held at Soquel Cider. So we're going to be doing a tasting with them, and also Robbie Honda of Tanuki Cider. Oh, the waves of the Pacific Ocean as it comes crashing upon the shore. Going to California, or even if you live in California, it's the ocean, the breeze, the smell, the landscape, and the people. And one of those folks is Robbie Honda, a classic California surfer dude vibe. I mean, how many people call you dude when you're a gal? But he does, and somehow he could get away with it. You don't mind it. There's something about Robbie that I just want to go up and give him a big old bear hug, because it's his artistic experience that he brings you through in his cider, his incredible passion for it. In fact, I have a bottle in front of me right now, and this was something a little bit different, dry still cider. 8.5% alcohol by volume. And I love what he did on the label here. He says he gives credit to the orchardists, and he has on the top, apples by the 5 Mile Orchard. Now that's Jake Mann, and 5 Mile Orchard is in that area that we're going to be going to and making a stop. It's on the itinerary. And it says, fermented and aged in neutral port barrels. Has the varieties, Newtown Pippin, Bellflower, and Mutsu. He's been working a lot with Bellflower and these other two varieties too. It's dry and unfiltered. Only 95 cases produced. I just love that piece. And then the last and final part here, there's a flower. I'm not quite sure what it is, but it says, into the abyss throw grace and greed. Dream a little as they temporarily lie. Oh, exquisite. And then the last part is inspired by fathers and sons. Oh, I mean, okay. Being a cider maker, you're an artist. I mean, it's one part custodial. You know that. But the ones I want to hang out with are the ones who see their trade as being artwork. Artwork through harmony with the apple and the liquid. And that's who Robbie Honda is. And we're going to be at the Apple Barn with Santa Cruz Cider Company and with Tanuki and be doing a double side-by-side tasting. And I'll be recording Robbie's conversation, put it up on the podcast. So that's going to be an extra kind of special part of it, to be taking part of a cider chat on that day. So that's going to be our afternoon on April 12th, really packed with Martinelli's, with Santa Cruz Cider Company, and Robbie Honda. And then we'll be heading back to our drop-off location for folks to go off and have dinner and get a good rest before the next day, which is going to be packed again with more cider fun. So let's take a pause here, and we'll be right back with our events for April 13th on the Monterey Bay Cider Tour. on Saturday, we're going to be up and out, not too early in the morning, at a reasonable time of day. We'll be meeting up with Eric Ryder of Ryder Ranch. And with Eric, we're going to be doing a Newtown Pippin tasting. Now, there's been a number of Newtown Pippin tastings. We had one recently at Franklin County Cider Days this past fall. And because Eric is such an aficionado, he makes some amazing cider, and he has a number of Newtown Pippins. So we're going to be able to do both a horizontal and vertical tasting. One part of this is really being able to develop your palate to taste terroir. So the Newtown Pippins that we'll be tasting will have one from an orchard that is across the street from 5 Mile Orchard. Then we're going to have one Newtown Pippin from a 75-year-old tree at the orchard, and then one from a 100-year-old tree. Maybe we should do it like a blind tasting, and you could tell us which one you think is the 100 or the 75 or across the street. That would be kind of cool. Or we could just really develop our Newtown Pippin and our ability to drink in the terroir of this landscape. Remember, I was saying it's dry farming territory, which means that they don't use irrigation at that same level. There might occasionally be a little bit, but not too much. In fact, I really recommend you going back and listening to Jake Mann of 5 Mile Orchard. He's part of a multi-generational orchard family who has been part of 5 Mile Orchard, which seems like forever, probably as long as the Martinellis have been there. I'm not quite sure about that, but maybe. And you learn a lot about the apples in that chat with Jake, and also with John Martinelli. He talks about how apples are really helping with the drought factor because they don't consume a lot of water like the berry crop does, very minimal. And as such, anywhere where you're doing dry farming, I know even Eric Bordelais talks about this in terms of like, don't soak it up with water. With Eric, he's to the extreme where I don't think he makes sure like the apples are dry if he's going to press them so he doesn't get any water in his cider. And in this case, in that region, the Parajo Valley, where Eric is getting his apples from, where all these makers are located and getting their apples from, a lot from 5 Mile Orchard, is that you have these very dry conditions that then lend itself to a very condensed apple. It's not all water soaked. You probably know that difference when you bite into an apple, if it's a culinary apple, and it's really the apple profile's coming out. It's not all just oozing juice that could really take away from the flavor. So we're going to be doing both a horizontal and vertical tasting and absolutely geeking out with Eric. I'm stoked to be part of that session and to introduce you to a really nice guy who's been so passionate. He took the Peter Mitchell course, and what he got out of that was to create a cidery that's in a 10 by 10 building. And that's primarily what he's using for his main cidery. So you could talk to him all about that. I've referred different friends to Eric. He really is an aficionado at a level of both cider making and cider tasting. It's going to be crazy good. And that's what we do on Saturday morning. From there, we're then going to head over to Venti Ranch Cider, which is owned by Peter and Aaron Cerventi. Peter is a tax accountant and Aaron is an interior designer. So you can imagine that there's going to be an eye for beauty at this orchard, which, by the way, is certified organic. So, start there and then take it to the moon. Because they're on the orchard, they're able to manage that picking and at that optimal time to make the cider. They recently came out with a hop cider, and they also have their premium traditional cider, which is barrel aged and is dry to off dry. They also make a number of modern cider styles too, including a ginger and hibiscus, in addition to the Citra hopped cider. Should be pretty cool. This is where we're going to be bringing our bag lunches, enjoying the backdrop of the orchard, and be able to have a tour and tasting with both Peter and Aaron. I'm kind of really looking forward to that piece because, you're moving around, you're tasting all morning. We're going to be doing this Newtown tasting with Eric, and then we get to have lunch in an apple orchard. It's just moving from one orchard to another, which is exactly how I like to do a cider tour. And also getting to hang out with very passionate people who are all about preserving the apple and making the best product to serve for you. From Venti Ranch Cider, we're going to then head back to the hotel, take a little bit of snooze time, which I suspect you might like, or maybe you'll kick out by the pool or go down to the ocean. It's up to you, because you got a little bit of a small window of time before we get picked up again and head over to Soquel Cider for a outdoor 5-course cider dinner. Last week's episode 164 was with Laura Everett, the cider maker of Soquel Cider. And in that chat, you hear us walking about the orchard. There's a his and her orchard, one where she has her heritage orchard, and then her husband Rich has culinary apples. It works for them, and it's really delightful. On top of that, there's all these fruit trees and the persimmon trees that won't be fruiting at that time, but I'll tell you, just to gaze upon these trees is going to be magnificent. And if we are lucky, Ciderville, if we are lucky, we might be hitting it smack dab somewhere in the time of apple blossom season in Monterey Bay. I might just spontaneously combust at that moment. And if I have a glass of cider in my hand, great. If I don't, please put one in my hand. That's the way to go, I'll tell you. Oh, my goodness. So at this site, they have this outdoor pavilion, if you will. And that's where we're going to be having the actual dinner. 5 courses paired with the ciders from the makers in that area. And there is also an additional treat at the end. I can't give it all away, but there's always a little treat, a little something to just keep us happy in Ciderville. From there, we then return back to our drop-off point at the hotel and say au revoir until next time. This is a full, amazing tour with 6 cider makers in a balanced part of time. I mean, to have 6 makers but not have it be overwhelming, that is a goal. And just think, you don't have to drive. You could just enjoy and take it all in and experience Monterey Bay, Parajo Valley, Santa Cruz County as it should be. I hope you could come along with me April 12th and 13th on the Monterey Bay Cider Tour. Go to ciderchat.com, the page that says Totally Cider, get the drop-down menu, and you'll find Monterey Bay Cider Tour there. All the details, episodes that you can listen to even more about the different makers that we'll be visiting with, and make your reservations. The reservation line is open now, and between now and February 12th, is the early bird special. So get in on that. This is going to be one heck of a cider tour, and I so look forward to doing it with you. You know what would also be really super cool is if you could share the news about this Monterey Bay Cider Tour with friends and family that you know might be interested in doing something like this. Not only does it let them know about the podcast, that's really helpful, but if you're enjoying this podcast and you want to keep keeping on, then let people know that you think can go on this tour. Just on the off-shot chance that you can't make it this time, which I really hope isn't true. I hope you can make it. It would be so much fun hanging with you. But if that is that kind of stuck place, well, then share it. It will not only help the podcast, but it will keep this cider tour going so I could continue to bring these opportunities to folks not only in California, but also all over, out and about in Ciderville. It's really easy. If you're listening on your phone, just go back to your directory, to the app, and there is typically a share button there. And if you're at ciderchat.com, well, and you have the browser window open, then just take the little address up on the top of the browser window and send an email or a text message to somebody. I suspect that there is a very good chance that you know somebody who would love to go on a cider tour. And you know how it is in Ciderville. If you have good news, share it from the mountaintop. And keep on beating that drum that cider is going up around the world. Now, next week, I'll be in CiderCon, and before I go there, I have to make a little bit of a correction that I've been talking about, screaming from the mountaintop, and that is about who is going to be the country guest at CiderCon 2020. And I have to follow up on this, but it looks like it's going to be Ireland, and for whatever reason, I thought it was Japan. So my deepest apologies for any kind of confusion out there in Ciderville. I saw a posting that it is Ireland, which means that's just a matter of time before it's Japan. There's so many different areas in the world, and we got to kind of share the space together and keep on promoting each other, which is what we do constantly, right? So again, my apologies for that. Look to 2020. It looks like it's going to be Ireland. And if you want to know a little bit more about Irish cider, you can listen to episode 157 with County Cork's Killahora Orchard. An incredible chat. There's even a bit of Irish singing in there. This particular episode has been getting an amazing amount of good notice because it's really worthwhile. So check that out. That again is County Cork Killahora Orchard, episode 157. Well, Ciderville, next week I'll be in Chicago for CiderCon. It's a pretty full week for me, a lot of recording, things I'll be bringing back to you. I'm not sure if I'm going to have an episode released next week because I just have so much to prepare between now and then. A little unusual for me to take a week off, but maybe this is time for you to go back and listen to a couple episodes. Or perhaps, you never know, maybe I'll come out with a Cider Chat Live on Wednesday or Thursday. I don't know. I'll do the best I can. You know I will. In the meantime, this is Rhea Windcaller signing off for now. Looking forward to seeing you in Ciderville.
Going up, going up.
Yeehaw!